Very good morning to you all joining us today for our EA debates. Today we are going to be talking about the Mercosur Trade Agreement and asking the question, will this year, 2023, be the year it has finally going to be ratified? It's been June 2019 since the agreement was finally reached, but we're still seeing negotiations ongoing. And just this week, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz made a fresh appeal for the negotiations to finally come to an end so we can see some writing on the paper. So with me to discuss that today, I am delighted to welcome many of those who are involved in this and also very, very knowledgeable about the topic. First of all, it is my great pleasure to welcome Ambassador Pedro Miguel da Costa e Silva, who, of course, in his role is head of the Brazilian mission to the European Union. Paolo Garzotti is also joining us from DG Trade within the European Commission, and he's head of unit for the unit dealing with Latin America. Ima Rodriguez Pinheiro is the MEP and coordinator of the S&D group within the Inter Committee, the Trade Committee in the European Parliament, and also chair of the Conference of Chairs of the European Parliament delegations outside the European Union. Gustavo Müller is senior researcher at the Leuven Centre for Global Governance Studies at the University of Leuven here in Belgium, and also working under the Horizon 2020 project Engage, which studies those external action sides of the European Union. And last but by no means least, we are delighted from VDMA, Vice President of VDMA, Bertram Karloff is also joining us. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for being here this morning, and of course to you, our audience, joining us from around Europe. I'm going to let you all give me your sort of perspective on why this trade agreement is so important, both from a geopolitical point of view and also from a trade point of view, from an economic perspective. Ambassador, let me start with you. Give me your perspective. It's been several years, I said at the beginning, June 2019, that these talks have been dragging on. Why is it so important that we do finally reach some sort of agreement?
Well, good morning. I want to thank Euroactiv for the invitation to be here today. I also want to greet my fellow panelists. Well, if the EU-Mercosur is finalized, and if it is approved, and if it comes into force, three important ifs, I think that it could be a strong instrument to foster trade and investment, to diversify trade and investment flows, to generate new value chains between the European Union and the Mercosur countries. And it's important always to recall that it is an association agreement. It goes far beyond trade, and it involves a series of instances of cooperation and dialogue in a vast array of subjects that includes the many phases of sustainable development. So I think that if there is a decision and it is possible to conclude this agreement, it could be an important instrument to foster, to increase and to deepen relations between the two blocs. And of course, I want to make a disclaimer, an important one here today, that I'm speaking on behalf of Brazil and of course not on behalf of Mercosur. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Of course, yes, we understand you don't speak on behalf of the entire continent. But we will turn now to Paolo from the Commission point of view. There've been barriers to this, but tell me why it is important to overcome concerns. And as the Ambassador said, this is more than just trade.
Thanks a lot to Euroactiv. Thanks and hello to all my fellow panelists. Indeed, I can share entirely what Pedro just said, Ambassador Brazil. This is an important and mutually beneficial agreement. I would say geopolitically first and then economically. As Pedro says, it will facilitate investment with, if you consider Mercosur as a bloc, is the fifth biggest economy outside the EU. To make some comparison in terms of trade, this agreement would be 4 times larger than the economic benefits that the free trade area with Japan, the agreement with Japan, and 8 that the one of Canada has generated. So there's great potential. But I would say that the most important thing is geopolitical dimension. In today's circumstances, to partner, and it's important to underline that is an association agreement, is an agreement that covers the political pillar, the cooperation pillar, and the trade pillar, is geopolitical dimension, the possibility to partner up with Mercosur countries to work together towards a green transition. And we have the technologies, they have the potential to help us on this. And so I think it's going to be really a partnership on that towards working together towards a green transition. That is, I think, the biggest advantage for this deal. And as you said, Vice President Timmermans was there these days and made statements in these directions. And so the value is definitely there. And I would say, but maybe we can come to this later, that the political conditions as well have changed and improved recently. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paolo. Indeed, as you say, Vice President Timmermans has been there. I mentioned the German Chancellor being there as well. So the Council and the Commission represented. We're going to turn to the European Parliament. Inma, you're on the Trade Committee, so you're coordinating from the S&D side. Tell us what's been going on. Tell us why it is important and why it's worth paying attention to the details.
Okay, well, first, it's a pleasure for me to participate in these interesting conversations with these excellent speakers, and I would like to thank very much Euractiv for having invited me. Well, I will try to summarize my view and those of the European Parliament. We have to recognize that in today's world, a single country cannot face global crisis by itself with any chance of success. That's why it's necessary to seek political and economic alliance with other like-minded partners, as Mercosur is. The EU and Mercosur share values, and we are important allies in support of multilateralism, harness globalization, and defending an international trade order based on rules and values. The signing and ratification of the agreement will send a clear message to the world. Not signing and ratifying it would be very negatively affecting the credibility of both sides of the European Union and will mean the loss of influence in this important geographical area, given the growing importance of China and the United States. Also, it is very important in terms of food security. This FTA is an opportunity because Mercosur countries are in a privileged position in the face of an upward economic cycle linked to food production that is scarce because of the war in Ukraine. And referring to the trade and economic importance, it is important to highlight that the EU would be the first trading partner to gain preferential trade access to Mercosur, a currently closed market of 260 million consumers, which is the fifth largest economy in the world, as Paolo Garzotti told before. Obviously, we also work on agreements to defend the economic interest of the Union, but more important than what we trade is under which conditions we produce the goods we trade. For this reason, it's so important the Sustainable Development chapter that establishes the commitment of the parties to effectively implement the Paris Agreement on climate change and fight against deforestation. This is a very, very important point for the European Parliament. In order for the agreement to be supported, but the Parliament is not enough what is included in the agreement, and that's why it's so important, the Sustainable Development chapter, to be accompanied by an ambitious and legally binding instrument to combat deforestation. I think we are talking about a very important agreement whose time to be signed is right now, when there is a window of opportunity under the Spanish presidency and the triumph of Lula. I see our alliance with Mercosur as a great opportunity for Europe. Thanks, Alex.
Thank you very much. You mentioned the upcoming Spanish presidency. We, of course, have the Swedish presidency at the moment, and there have been noises that the Council is ready to make a move. Gustavo, you're an independent researcher. We've heard from the Commission, the Parliament, and I've mentioned again the Council. Tell us what your sort of outsider perspective is.
Thanks, Jennifer, and thanks to Euractiv support for having me. Good morning to my fellow panelists. Let me give then an independent view. on why it's important. And obviously, as the other said, it's more than a trade deal, right? It's an association agreement that includes multiple aspects in terms of politics, but also in terms of environment, human rights, and labor conditions as well. From an EU side, it's clear that it is about trade liberalization, right? It is about market access, but it's also about sustaining a rules-based international order. Let's remember that back in 2019, when the agreement was agreed upon, we were at the height of Donald Trump's trade wars with the World Health Organization and other international institutions. So that is the geopolitical importance, right? That's marking a presence in South America, that's remaining relevant in South America from an EU perspective. But from a Mercosur perspective, the importance is also related to trade in the sense that it is about opening the market in a way that makes sense to the industries, to the local industries, in a way that makes sense for countries that are middle income countries to open up and develop sustainably. But it's also about the unit of the bloc, right? On the Mercosur side. Mercosur is a bloc, an economic bloc of 4 countries, right? Which is in itself also going through its own struggles, right? Just last week, Lula traveled to Uruguay to convince the president of Uruguay not to sign or negotiate a separate trade agreement with China, which would, in a sense, break up the bloc. So it's important that this agreement, in a way, moves forward in order so that Mercosur opens up, right, and has keeps its autonomy in relation to the growing competition that we see in Latin America from China, from the European Union, from the United States as well. From an EU perspective, politically, it's important to have that foothold in the region. The EU has already signed many trade deals with countries in South America, in Latin America, and if you look at the map, we're only missing, in that sense, the Mercosur countries and a couple of others. So signing this deal which is about trade, but it's much more than that, will definitely enforce or enhance the foothold that the European Union has in the region.
Well, Bertram, let me come to you. I mean, VDMA represents about 3,500, maybe more, German, European, mechanical and plant engineering companies. So you're obviously focused a little bit more on the trade side of it. So give me that perspective, please, and why it's so important.
Yes, thank you for the introduction. I'm an entrepreneur myself and represent 3,500 companies, very like my own company. We are small SMEs and we have a high rate of export. The average export quota of our member companies is more than 75%. And the smaller a company is, the more important it is to have FTAs to do international trades, because we are not as strong in dealing with all the regulations. So export-oriented companies need open markets. And for that, VDMA has always supported the Commission during the negotiation with third countries on FTA. However, I heard so many ifs today. We do need FTAs that enter into force and that do not hover around and we have to wait until they come into force. So I hope that Mercosur Free Trade Agreement will become a good example here, as this FTA has been concluded in June 2019, and we still do not know when it will enter into force. We call on the Commission to come up with a proposal here as soon as possible, because speed matters. The agreement would give the EU a geostrategic advantage over other countries, including China and the United States, and I feel that there's a race going on to open international markets, especially in a time where we suffer under decoupling trends. So this agreement will lead to many advantages for my sector, the machinery sector, like elimination of machinery tariffs, modern rules of origin, and better opportunities in the field of public procurement as well. Brazil, for example, has various strategic strengths regarding natural resources, young, well-trained professionals, and the agricultural sector. The European machinery and equipment manufacturing industry can contribute with a technical solution to sustainable infrastructure and to place production in the Mercosur countries. We could fight together youth unemployment, for example. Mechanical and plant engineering are an enabler industry for climate protection and resource efficiency. Only with green technologies, which we can offer, with that innovative strength, targets can be achieved and transformation can be shaped. A study by the EU points to Brazil as the world's largest producer of niobium, 92%. We have bauxite, We have natural graphite, which we need for high-tech industries. And Russia's war in Ukraine showed the extreme importance of diversified supply chains. The Mercosur countries can play an important role here to diversify supply chains for European companies and also to integrate those countries into our supply chains. Finally, I hope that the inauguration of Lula as Brazilian president will give the necessary impetus for Commission decision on the signature and conclusion of this FTA. We do hope very much that the EU member states and the European Parliament will approve that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bertram, and thank you indeed to all the speakers. You've set out very clearly in those opening remarks a lot of the topics that we're going to pick upon in the next hour or so. I would remind our audience at home that you can ask questions, simply type them in the box and we'll try and get our panelists to address those. And of course, do share on social media using the hashtag EADebates. One of the things that struck me, Gustavo, you said that the area needs to open up. So let me ask about what is the current status quo. Pedro, perhaps you can start as an expert on Brazil in particular. How closed is the market currently? Is there a need to see more opening up?
Of course, the idea that Brazil or Mercosur are closed economies is a concept that I not necessarily share. Maybe the other speakers have that perception. Sometimes, depending on the metrics and how you think about this issue, you will get different views. For example, if you look at tariffs, of course, the applied tariffs that Mercosur has and the EU have, they are different. Brazil are higher, but you then have to take into consideration that we have very few tariff peaks, very few tariff rate quotas and trigger prices, other such mechanisms that basically bar countries from entering the European market. So it's a question of who's the beholder, who's looking at market access. That's one point that I would make. The other point that I would make is that I think that our colleague from the private sector, from the representative from the German industry, he knows very well that not only German firms are present, for example, in Brazil, but firms from all over Europe. And they are very happy there with this, the stability of our rules and of how they can do business in Brazil. So I don't think that the way of looking at this is whether the economies are closed or not. I much rather prefer the idea that if we move towards this trade agreement and we finalize it and it comes into force, that it can generate new opportunities, new for trade and investment, more employment, and create better conditions on both sides for sustainable development. That's how I would rather look at the issue. Thank you.
Well, thank you for taking my question in the spirit intended, rather to provoke rather than to say that I know exactly what's happening, because I know that you guys are much more expert than I am. And Gustavo, let me come to you. You said the phrase opening up. Tell me, what is the current status quo as you view it? Because, of course, it depends on your perspective, as the ambassador has pointed out.
No, thanks, and I fully agree with the ambassador. I think the country is already open, and the countries of Mercosur are already open to world trade in many ways. And if you look particularly to the agricultural sector, that's the one that the EU on its own side is the close actor when it comes to establishing quotas and protective measures as well. But coming back to the need of opening up the economy, it has to be done in a way that makes sense to development of the countries of the Mercosur bloc, right? Mercosur negotiates as a bloc. It is a customs union, but at the same time, all those countries are trying to develop, right? So Lula, now that was just inaugurated a month ago, one of the main economic policies that he's putting forward is actually the reindustrialization of the country. Right? Brazil is one of the few countries in South America which still has a relevant and sizable industry. It has declined over the last few years, but now it's come back as being a priority of the government. So, of course, signing a trade deal that would expose that fragile industry to external competition, it's a delicate move, right? So that has to be thought through. There will be certainly a lot of negotiations that will look at the original agreement back in 2019 to see to what extent it is still adapted to the priorities that the new government's in Brazil, but also in Argentina and Uruguay have in regards to the agreement. So Mercosur, it is, in comparison to other countries and blocs, relatively more closed. It has few free trade agreements with the outside world. But the one with the European Union would definitely be a breakthrough. But again, this opening up has to be done in a way that makes sense to the local industry as well.
Bertram, let me come to you. You made clear in your opening remarks about the benefits. Tell us from your, if you like, from an industry or an economic perspective, what is the status quo as you see it?
Thank you. First of all, I would like to state that although I have a rather heavy German accent, I speak for European industry here, as VDMA enjoys a membership of many European companies as well. Yes, they are very important markets, the Mercosur countries, but the term I would like to use is ease of use of trade and investment for smaller companies. As I said before, it's more difficult to export to import for smaller companies. And we do have rather severe tariffs on our products, like tariffs range for machinery products between 14 to 20%. That's not nothing. And we have peak tariffs up to 35%. And I think we can do more together, Europe and the Mercosur. For example, the export of machinery to Brazil is around 2 billion euros, to Argentina 440 million euros. Paraguay, it's 33 million, and Uruguay 55 million. Whereas the import to the EU, as per today, from Brazil, for example, is only 170 million euros. So we could become stronger, and we could strengthen our joint ties, and especially we could improve the tying of the supply chains for investment. Predictability, reliability are very important issues, and these could be definitely strengthened by an FTA.
Thank you. Paolo, let me come back to you. I know I will probably be pushing you a little bit. It's not necessarily for the Commission to comment on these things, but we heard mentioned by our European Parliament in the representative, there are geopolitical considerations. We have to consider China in the global mix. We consider the situation with the US. What do you think would change? I mean, what is the state of play with this trade agreement in terms of the impact on geopolitical relations?
Thank you, Jennifer. First, you talk about China and the US. One important element of this agreement will be that the European Union will be the first of the big players to establish a connection, a trade agreement, political and development with Mercosur. So you will have the first mover advantage. That is important, and I fully agree with the point that this has to be done in a manner that both on the Brazilian side, the Mercosur side, preserve the possibility for Mercosur countries to develop their industrial sector, as well as to preserve the European agricultural farmers and model. In terms of what Ima was saying, is more about the sustainable development dimension of the agreement, and we are working on that. There is an important element linked to deforestation, which 2 years ago, the Executive Vice President Dombrovskis of the in the Parliament stated was a problem with Mercosur, with our Mercosur agreement, and he wanted to address it. We are now in a situation where the new policies that President Lula have indicated, the position taken in Sharm el-Sheikh and the Biodiversity Convention, we think that really there's, as the President of the Union stated in front of the Parliament, an important window of opportunity to move in this field, which was politically the more delicate. Finally, the situation with aggression of Russia to Ukraine, the end of our access to the Russian market for the foreseeable future, that puts our partnership in terms of what the representative of the European small and medium enterprise indicated in terms of access to key inputs for our green transition in a new dimension. And it's a win-win because there's of course the raw materials dimension, but there's as well the potential for these countries to contribute to this transition in a manner that, thanks to their qualities, make them unique. If you see not just the raw materials, but production of green energy, I'm thinking in the whole region in Latin America, green hydrogen, both in Brazil and Chile and Argentina, there's really a lot of potential for a win-win. When you liberalize trade, even if the tariffs are important in certain fields, I would agree with Pedro that you wouldn't label Mercosur as a closed economy at all. But of course, there is potential to do much better. That is a chain effect that unleashes further investment, that unleashes quite a lot of a chain effect that brings better and higher integration between two economies, which shares the same values, have the same objective, because there's few places in the world today where you can look for more like-mindedness with European values than in Latin America. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you very much. Inma, let me come to you. We're getting quite a few questions in from our audience. Thank you very much, and please keep those coming. I see a couple of questions that are very linked. One from Copa Cogeca, who represent the agri-industry, another from ASEA, who is the automakers industry. So both representing European industries and asking much the same question in both cases. Has there been any consideration of splitting the agreement, is what they're asking. Is there a potential to split the deal as per Mexico and the Chile agreements, so FTA and then political cooperation? And the question actually, Inma, to you is, do you believe S&D MEPs would support such a split? But give me your thoughts, rather than necessarily saying what will happen or would happen in a hypothetical situation. Is splitting the deal a possibility?
Well, a possibility exists. It depends upon what is going to be the negotiation and what both sides are going to decide. We have the case of Chile, that it has been split in 3 different agreements. In the case of Chile, there is included an investment pillar. That is not the case for Mercosur. It's trade and association and cooperation agreement. What is really important and what is really the threat I have is that even if it is considered as one agreement, association agreement, or it is split in 2 different ones, the problem is that the part of cooperation and association agreement has to be ratified by its member states before it enters into force. And it can take a long, long time. As Bertrand said, speed matters. And I think that in this trade and association agreement is very, very important, the pillar of political and cooperation, because it's not only a matter of opportunity for trades, that is for sure very, very important, but it's a matter of cooperation. And in this sense, we have the example of Central America, where the trade pillar entered into force at the same time as it was ratified by the European Parliament and by the side of Central America. But we are still waiting for the entry into force of the pillar of cooperation and association agreement because one member state didn't give its consent. Then I think we have to think about it. This is a very crucial question referring to all the association agreements. But we will see what both sides decided. The important is that the content and the time. I think I fully agree that it's very important to be fast on this, because as Paolo told, the European Union has still the opportunity to be the first partner in the world to sign a general agreement with Mercosur. And I think it's very important also the message we can give to sign a trade agreement in these particular circumstances. But I think it's very, very important to try, also adding something that Paulo said, referring to your former question about the geopolitical importance regarding China. That is that the European Union will have to recognize that has lost market share in Mercosur to China. We have fallen to 24%, while China has reached 25%, and the trend may increase if this agreement is not signed, ratified, and implemented quickly. We can't remain inactive. We have spent a long, long time in order to end the negotiations. And I think, as I told before, that we have a unique opportunity now to try to finalize this. And referring, if you allow me, Jennifer, something that before our independent expert said, referring to Uruguay and the agreement with China. I think that it's important to know that Mercosur needs a lot of investment in terms of infrastructures, in terms of reducing the trade costs, and we have to be able to finish this association and cooperation agreement with all the opportunities that the trade pillar offers to both sides. And we have to do it taking on board the European Parliament, because if not, it wouldn't be possible to ratify this, but I think we are going to be able to do it. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. I'm fascinated by what you're saying, but I want to hear as well, Pedro, your perspective on this question of potentially splitting the agreement. We've just, as Emma and indeed Bertram have said, speed is important, timing is of the essence. What are those sort of considerations in terms of splitting it? Would it make things slower? Would it speed things up? What's your perspective? I think you may be on mute, Pedro.
Sorry. I think that this is a question more for Paulo and for the European side and for Mercosur. We have an open mind to look at whatever proposals the European side will make to us. So this is not an issue for us. It's something that the European side has to decide and put on the table, and we will look at it in due time. But we don't have strong views about that.
Thank you very much. Diplomatic answer. Paulo, I'm going to come to everyone and ask for your thoughts on this potentiality of splitting the agreement, because it is something that our audience is asking a lot of questions on.
Thank you, Jennifer. $1 million question. And honestly, from what I see, it's a little bit of a faux débat, as they say in French, in the sense that the importance of this deal, first of all, is the substance. And I think in 2018, we got the substance fundamentally right. We need to discuss clearly a couple of issues notably related to sustainable development. And we have listened as well to what our Mercosur friends will come. But the issue of the splitting or not splitting, the first point I want to say, this is going to be an agreement covering political, developmental aspects and trade aspects. So that is, I would say, a single political undertaking is something that goes together. Nobody is thinking about splitting in the sense of having a trade agreement without the rest. Secondly, the debate under splitting is a little bit biased in the sense that to say that if a trade agreement doesn't pass through national parliaments is not democratically legitimate is a reasoning fundamentally flawed. The European Parliament that will validate the trade agreement if we choose the Chilean solution, which is one single framework agreement with an interim trade agreement we will enter into force for a period of time until the framework agreement has into force with the full package in and will expire when the framework agreement is in force. If that happens, the European Parliament will vote on the agreement. The European Parliament is perfectly legitimate expression of the European people. So that debate is important, because we risk with this debate to delegitimize the very essence of the European Union. Take a legislation recently that Pedro had some questions about, the deforestation regulation, an important regulation by which any certain important goods, meat, cocoa, coffee, soya, that will be placed on the market of the European Union will have to be going through a very severe, I would say, due diligence, duly system. This has been voted by the European Parliament. They're not going to be ratified by individual parliaments. So I think we need to really devise the discussion about the split. A decision has not been taken yet. We have, of course, to discuss with our Mercosur friends, as we have done with Chile, as we are doing with Mexico, and we'll come with a solution that will be in full respect of the fact that this is one political undertaking, and take into account the legal and constitutional dimension of the Union. In any event, whatever's going to be the case in terms of legal ratification, the cooperation and political pillars, let's say, of the agreement will not possibly enter into force, but we're going to be provisionally applied most likely in almost their entirety. So at the end of the day, we will have a situation where this agreement almost entirely will be applied as soon as we got the signature and the validation by the Parliament and the conclusion.
Well, Inma, I think you wanted to jump in there to react, so please.
Yes, thank you. Yes, it's only to say that I fully agree that the European Parliament has the role, has the competence. We are legitimacy by all the citizens who voted in the European elections in order to decide what is going to be the result of a trade agreement that has been negotiated. The problem is the competence are divided in terms of cooperation and association agreement. There are a shared competence between the European Union and the member states. And in this case is when we have problems in order to try to implement the pillar of cooperation and association agreement. And I think that it's very important to try to do this as soon as possible. The member states have to be really, really involved in the fast of the implementation of this part of the agreement, because it is a very, very important issue to cooperate with Mercosur in order to increase the region as a region, well said, and in order to be able to make more competitive regions in terms of the investment they need, and the European Union has to facilitate, not only by China, because China is not really involved in all the principles and values we defend and we share with Mercosur side countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Inma. Bertram, I want to come to you. I feel I should note that we have got a lot of discussion happening from our audience online. In particular, a lot of people referencing areas related to the agri sector. Indeed, I'm seeing questions about poultry production, animal welfare, environmental protection, and various other issues that are kind of related to production standards and so on. But let me ask in general, Bertrand, we see that the agricultural sector is a little bit skeptical of this deal. I know you're not speaking for them, but you are speaking for businesses and industry and SMEs. Give me your perspective. What do you think would perhaps make everyone happier or indeed go some way to alleviating the concerns of that particular sector?
I think sometimes fear is overestimated. I'm a firm believer that the Mercosur and the EU agricultural sector would also benefit from an FTA here. It is a sensitive area because it is an area where there are a lot of state subsidizes, but trade helps. Trade helps to distribute wealth in the end. So let me give one example. We discussed deforestation. If we have more trade, if we have distribution of value chains, that means basically things are produced in the Mercosur country more than we have now. That shares profits, that creates employment in other areas. So deforestation might become decreasingly important, and we could get rid of that. We have the highest machinery tariffs in that area that hinders green technology to be imported into the Mercosur countries, like windmills, like hydrogen technology. That's all mechanical engineering. So distribute green technology, also green technology for agriculture. It's also machinery equipment, like the agricultural sector is the most advanced sector today in many countries for digitalization. So let's not protect our markets with high tariff. Let's open them, and it will give benefits also to the agricultural area, and we will also enable us to get rid of deforestation in a much better way.
Well, thank you. Pedro, let me bring you into this. I mean, there is quite an argument going on about whether farm-to-fork standards, production standards, are applicable or should be exported from the EU to set those standards. I really would be interested to hear your perspective as ambassador.
Thank you very much. I think, first of all, that it's important to remind the public who's watching this event that the Mercosur countries and the EU, they participate in international fora, international organizations where we have negotiated together stringent regulations for the export of agricultural and industrial goods. So trade is going on right now. Whether we have this agreement or we don't have this agreement, we have important trade flows with the European Union going both ways. And we have been respecting international standards all the time. And in many cases, the European standards. So I think that there is a very complicated issue here of narrative concerning this agreement. Many people believe that if this agreement comes into force, it will lower standards and that products from Mercosur countries will come into the European market that don't comply with European standards. And I want to state here very clear that it's simply not true. These are completely baseless allegations that I don't know where they come from, but they have no basis on facts, on reality. It's a narrative of those that, and I respect them, that don't like trade agreements and maybe don't like trade, but it's simply not true. Our products meet world class standards, and this agreement, if it comes into force, it will bring even more cooperation and even more dialogue in terms of standard setting and meeting standards and complying with standards. So it simply makes no sense, the idea that the agreement is something that is going to leave European consumers unprotected and so on and so forth. I want to make this point, and now I'm not being diplomatic at all, as you can see, very clearly, because I think that this is one of the things that we need to tackle. We need to end this disinformation and misinformation that really serves no one. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Pedro. I mean, we acknowledge all viewpoints and try to tackle them head on here at Euractiv. And I do remind our audience, have your say, take part in the discussion online, use the hashtag EA Debates on various social media channels to have this discussion, because we are trying to tackle the truth. Some of the best protected consumers in the world are European Union consumers, so we know that is to be the case. Gustavo, let me come to you. We've covered a lot of ground since I last came to you. Give me your perspective on these various competing ideas. What's your take on where we're going, and are we going in the right direction?
Right. Thanks, Jennifer. Look, so the EU-Mercosur negotiations were the negotiations that were always ongoing and never agreed upon, right? So now we have an agreement in principle, and it seems like ratification is far ahead, right? And so when that happens, actors on both sides, they're faced with a few options, right? They either change the text, which seems to not be a major option these days, or they wait for a change of context, right? Some sort of breakthrough that will create some sort of a new momentum, or they try to create a new momentum themselves. And in that sense, splitting the agreement might be one of those alternatives, right? You want to, after 3.5 years of that agreement in principle, you want to move things forward. So, well, let's split the trade, the agreement. Let's first decide on the political and then on the trade side, and so on and so forth. But the thing is, these are all interconnected, right? We call them pillars, but it's more like a noodle soup in a sense, right? It all comes together. And to use some sort of a phrase that we use a lot in the Brexit debate, nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. Right, so it might create a new momentum indeed to try to split it, bring it to different stages in the European Parliament, try to avoid the ratification by national parliaments as well. But at the same time, especially from a Mercosur perspective, all of those different pillars, they're all interconnected, right? So, and on the question of agriculture and standards, as the ambassador said, there is this misinformation that an agreement with Brazil and with Argentina and the rest of Mercosur would end up damaging consumer rights on the European side, but that will never happen, actually. And again, we saw that during the Brexit debate, how the European Union acts to protect consumers, to protect the standards of its common market. So if anything, an agreement with Mercosur, as it happens with any free trade agreement and association agreement, would actually raise standards. Right. This is what we're calling on the academic side the Brussels effect. Right. The fact that what is negotiated with Brussels, with the European institutions, via trade agreements, via other types of association agreements, tends to spread and diffuse the various standards that the European Union has. And that's valid for the industrial sector, right, where we can see all types of standards on how products are actually manufactured and labeled and transported. But that's also valid for the agricultural produce. Right, so nothing's going to come into the other side's market without actually respecting the standards that have been agreed upon, and maybe in the near future will be implemented.
Thank you. Paolo, I need to come back to you. I've got a series of questions coming from various people, from Robert Francis at Borderlegs, from Pauline Bastidon at Spirits Europe, from Catherine Stack, all asking about the additional instruments, specifically what will it look like? What will it be in terms of timing, content, format? And will it perhaps necessitate the reopening of current agreements? What's your perspective on this? What can you tell us without revealing anything that you're not allowed to say from the Commission side?
Thank you, Jennifer. Indeed, we are exactly in the process of working on that. So there's not much I can tell you in the details. What I can tell you is that we think that there is what we have in the original agreement of 2018 is a good deal. What we think is that possibly we have to sit down with the Mercosur friends and clarify what we have agreed is indeed what we both meant. And the additional instrument will be something that will go more granular, more in detail in some of the elements related to sustainable development across the board. This is something that the Executive Vice President has promised already several months ago in front of the European Parliament, and we're gonna do this very shortly. The context has changed as well. As I said, we have a regulation on deforestation that will enter into force in a few months and will be applied by the end of 2024. We got a due diligence legislation that will come into place. So the preoccupation, or the legitimate preoccupation of the European public of not contributing to problems like the deforestation or other sustainable development related problems via trade are much better addressed by means of this, let's say, EU legislation than by conditioning market access. If I say something on on the point on agriculture. I think I agree totally with Pedro that the protection of the European consumer is not negotiable, that the standards will remain the same, and our partners know what this means when they have to deal with inspection and of our DG Santa experts on this. We are very thorough with a deal or without a deal. The preoccupation of some of our agricultural and farmers is the economic impact that this may have on them. And this is something that the European Union has always looked very much in detail and with a lot of attention. We are of the opinion that the impact will be manageable and constructive. We have created quotas for sensitive products that allow, I just make you an example, the quota that the whole Mercosur has for beef, a very sensitive quota, is equivalent to what the Mercosur exports to China in 10 to 12 days. So we are careful. And even if this creates a problem, we have means both in terms of safeguards and of budget interventions in the Union, as we have demonstrated with crises in the past, to address those issues. So what I want to tell to the agricultural community is nobody, let's say, underestimates your preoccupation. They are there. We think that what we have done in 2019 takes that fully into account, while granting a legitimate due market access to our Mercosur partners. So we shouldn't be confusing the debate on preserving the economic viability of our agricultural sector, which is very important, with anything else. We are looking into that. We are doing the deforestation issues with the additional instruments and with the deforestation regulation. And in terms of preservation of the EU consumer, that has nothing to do with market access. You produce in the Union, you produce in Brazil, you produce in the United States. When you sell in the European market, you have always to respect the legislation and the high world-class protection that we have in the Union. Besides, for those countries to show that they can be able to sell in such a sophisticated, if you allow me with due modesty, market as the European Union is a label. So if you show that you can sell your products in a market that is so demanding in terms of consumer protection as the Union, is very important for them in terms of quality of the products and price. And I'm entirely sure that the Mercosur products will match that as they are matching it now.
Thank you very much, Paolo. Gustavo, just to get your perspective, as I say, as a sort of an independent researcher giving us a slightly different view, what are your thoughts on an additional instrument?
Well, let me go back first to the agricultural part, right, which has indeed been sort of the stumbling stone for quite a while in this deal. But the trade is already happening, right? The trade on agricultural products, on meat products and dairy from Brazil, from Argentina to Europe, that's already ongoing, right? If you want, we can go in any shop here in Europe, and we're going to find Argentinian meat. We're going to find products from Brazil, etc. So trade is already going on, and the agreement that has been signed, it contains a free trade agreement with a few exceptions on the industrial side. On the agricultural side, it's not really a free trade agreement, is it? It's more like a quota system, right? And a lot of that quota is already actually being traded currently, right? So at the end of the day, on the agricultural side, there is a lot of unease on both sides, both in the Mercosur and on the European Union public, for different reasons. On the European side, it is about competition, right? Because it's the first time that the European Union will be signing a free trade agreement with agricultural powerhouses that are Brazil and Argentina, right? We can talk about the environmental consequences of that. We can talk about the climate change consequences, labor conditions, animal welfare. But the fact is that those two countries, and Uruguay as well in that mix, they are very efficient when it comes to the agricultural sector, right? And that will be a first for the European Union to be signing a trade deal that will, in a way, even if it's about quotas, open up the market a little bit. On the Mercosur side, it is about the size of those quotas, right? So when we decide to do a free trade agreement on the industrial side, right, and it looks like a free trade agreement with a few exceptions, the agricultural side in Brazil and Mercosur, in Brazil and Argentina, are also not very happy with the outcome, exactly because they're still within that quota system. So it's a bit of a political bargain in that sense. It's not only about economics, of course, but the various aspects that we see popping up in terms of environment, in terms of labor conditions, in terms of animal welfare, they're very relevant, and we should indeed be discussing them. There are other means to achieve it. It's not only about the association agreement, as it was mentioned by Pedro and others. There are other instruments that can be used to protect, including, by the way, bilateral relations, right? Brazil and Argentina, Uruguay and Paraguay, they have bilateral relations with European Union countries. They're also part of multi-level agreements on various of those aspects. So protection of those standards can be done also by bilateral and multilateral means. They don't have to necessarily be a sine qua non condition for the agreement to take place. But they are as well, in a way, once they are solved, so to speak, when they are solved, the environmental, the labor conditions, the human rights, and all those conditionalities, once we are beyond that, we're still going to be left with the geoeconomics aspect of it, right? There's still underpinnings of the agreement that have to be rethought so that it can move forward.
Well, thank you. No one underestimates the complexity. Inma, I think you wanted to jump in with something to add.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I would like to add something referring to both, to the deforestation instruments and to the agricultural side. No? From the deforestation instrument, the only thing I would like to add is that it's very important to be binding and to be set at the same level as the free trade agreement and the association and cooperation agreement. It has to be seated at the same level as the agreement, because it's very, very important for the European Parliament that to be in this sense. And on referring to the agricultural sector, well, I can understand the concerns of producers of some sectors, but I would like to add that in this agreement is included the bilateral safeguard clauses that allow an application temporary of tariffs up to 4 years to protect a specific sector when there is a risk of an increased increment of imports that could give big consequences for a sector. I think this is very, very, very important, and we have to follow very well this part of the agreement, because we have already known some consequences that it was not foreseen in the agreement side. I'm speaking about South Africa, for instance, and the consequences for citrus products. And it is really very, very complicated to ensure a level playing field. And I think it's very, very important for agricultural products to be sure that we are going to face the same rules, and we are going to achieve a level playing field in all the products. But I would like also to highlight something that I think it has not said before, and from my side, I think it's very, very important for our European agricultural sector. I am referring to geographical indications, and I think that it's very important that from the Mercosur side, there has been recognized some 350 European geographical indications for wines, spirits, beers, and food products. And I want to recognize this from the Mercosur side, because I think it is very, very important for a European side, and I think it's important to know. And the other thing, and I finish with this, I fully agree with what the ambassador said before, that we have to transmit the real information and not to allow that because of a bad information, it is established an idea that is not supported by the real data. I think we really need to know and to transmit the reality of the things as they are. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you, Inma. I think you've got to the heart of quite a lot of the issues there. We have about 15 minutes left now, so I want to maybe give each of you a chance to take a step back, because we have a lot of questions coming in, and I know, unfortunately, we won't have time in this debate to answer all of them. But people are asking, what about the externalities? How significant are the Argentine elections? What can we say with the new Brazilian president? What do we expect? What changes do we see there? We also ask questions about whether there are sort of, if you like, splitting bilateral agreements. What should we worry about those developments? You know, for example, Uruguay entering into formal negotiations on an FTA with China. There's a lot of other moving parts. So I want to give everyone a chance to zoom out and tell me, you know, even within the EU, are there particular member states that are more sceptical than others? What are the real chances of ratification? Pedro, let me come to you first on this.
Thank you very much. If you don't mind, I'll very quickly take on a few of the issues that were mentioned. The issue of the side letter, again, the Mercosur side, I think, is totally open to look at what the European Union will present and discuss a document that can be balanced, reasonable, pragmatic, realistic, and that takes into consideration that we already have, if not the most ambitious, one of the most ambitious sustainable development chapters in a trade agreement and an association agreement that the EU has negotiated with any other partner. A short comment on changing circumstances, because several of the speakers, especially Paolo, have spoken about the so-called autonomous legislations by the EU. These are legislations that, as Paolo rightly mentioned, referring to me, we are concerned about. We are concerned about their effects. They were decided unilaterally by the EU. And we're concerned about what effects this legislation will have on our exports and on doing business with the EU. But we hope that through the implementation process of this legislation, dialogue and cooperation with our countries, that we can avoid any trade disrupting effects. On your specific question, the comment that I would make is that, of course, we have a new government in Brazil, and the new government needs to look at the agreement in detail, examine it. It's a complex agreement. But as you have mentioned at the beginning of our event, the Brazilian president has made some very clear remarks about our interest in this agreement. But now we need to sit down and follow through and see how we're going to progress with the pending issues. And of course, there are some issues that are still need some fine tuning and that we need to work on. And I think that if we look at this in a pragmatic way, it is doable. I think both sides are looking for an agreement that will benefit their populations, and that will be seen as something that will help our relations. And here I will leave a final comment, since we were talking about bilateral relations. I think that we need to work on two tracks. We have the Mercosur track, but then we have the track of the EU relations with each one of our countries. And in the case of Brazil, we have a strategic partnership that gives us a structure for working on a series of different issues, from the environment to energy to critical minerals to human rights to whatever you want. And I think that it's high time for us to reboot this partnership and at the same time work on Mercosur. But we need to do both things, because I think that will be mutually beneficial. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pedro. Paolo, there's a lot of, as I said, and as Pedro has highlighted, a lot of moving parts here. Zoom out and give me your impressions of what is likely to happen next. Give me a sense of timing.
The sense of timing is urgent in the sense that indeed we have closed politically in 2019. It's taken a lot of time to get here for a number of reasons. And I just quote my president, who said in front of the parliament that we got a unique window of opportunity, which means that 2023, quoting the title of this seminar, it should be definitely the year to move ahead. We got a Latin American summit just decided on the 17th and 18th of July. And so the timing is definitely to move ahead and see if that we can find a solution. On the point of zooming out, is this deal will be extremely important as well for Mercosur as a customs union, as a market, as an integration project, something that is important. It will be a tool to address. Pedro said that some of your regulations, he calls it unilateral measures, and maybe with other qualifications, we call it Brussels effect. But it's true that these measures can be effective if we implement them in cooperation and partnership with the other countries, so that they don't become a conflictual ground, but they become a way to move together in the right direction. And trade and this political cooperation agreement can only help that. If I want to close that, is we consider that across the board we are much better with an agreement in place than without an agreement in place. Whatever are the problems and the issues that we are trying to address, and the fact that we're doing now with a like-minded group of countries is even more important. You refer to the European Union, different member states. There are few issues on earth on which our member states do not disagree to a certain extent. That is the beauty of the Union. We are united in diversity. I believe that on this, the rationale and presentations that we're gonna make, and the analysis and explanations will lead to an understanding of the benefits of this deal. But we, as you know, we will discuss all of this in the institutional fora, be it the Council, in the European Parliament, because we can only progress on this in a transparent and open way, which is definitely what we're going to be doing from now.
Thank you, Paola. Paolo, let me, Matt, go to you. Paolo mentioned there, united in diversity. I mean, this free trade agreement does aim to espouse a lot of those European values we hold. So tell me, what are the real chances of ratification this year, as per the title of our debate today?
Well, the first thing I have to highlight that if it is going to be a whole association and cooperation agreement with the trade pillar, the ratification has to be supported by all member states. Then what we can do during this year is, well, first, that the agreement comes to the Parliament. And in this sense, I think the Commission have to work very hard with our partners of Mercosur in order to be able to bring to the Parliament the agreement as soon as possible. And it means that it has to be translated to all the official language and to pass the legal review. Once the agreement comes to the Parliament, we will have time enough to study, to scrutinize it, and to be able to be voted in the Parliament. And the pillar, the trade pillar, would be ratified at this moment, but not, as I said before, the association and cooperation agreement. I think that is really very important to take advantage of this opportunity, this window of opportunity. I think it's very important to take advantage of the Spanish presidency that is going to support all of our best with our member states and with the Mercosur side in order to be able to finalize the agreement, the political agreement, and all the elements that has to be besides the agreement. No, I think that in this sense, the most important thing we have to say is to show the rest of the world that there is a way of dialogue, of consensus, of negotiation, in order to be able to achieve the best results for both sides, in order to give opportunities to our enterprises to increase its productivity and increase employment, to increase the opportunities for consumers to have a wide products to a lower prices. And what is even more important, to show that we can share the reforms and the way we have to challenge we have to face all the challenges we have, no? And in this sense, it's very important to strengthen our support of multilateralism in our world where protectionism is increasing and increasing. We need to show that there is another way to resolve the problems we face, and this is coming for negotiating, dialoguing, and always trying to be the best for our allies, not only by ourselves, but to the final solution. And I think in this sense, Mercosur is very important because it's a very important way of integration. Our integration region in Latin America is so important for the rest of Latin America and so important for the rest of the world and for sure for Europe. And I think that it's very important to know that now that in recent weeks we have known that Mercosur is starting to formalize the idea of having a single currency, who in the world can best advise Mercosur in the process than the European Union. And in this sense, we are here in order to support and to be able to achieve the best result.
Thank you. Gustavo, a final word from you, please.
A few words. Thanks, Jennifer. So everyone in the panel was talking about window of opportunity, right? And there was clearly one in 2019 when the agreement was agreed in principle. The question is the window wide enough now in 2023 so it can pass, right? And I think there are contradicting trends here that do not allow us to give a certain answer to it. For example, the inauguration of Lula brings in two different aspects of the agreement, right? The administration will certainly protect the environment more. It will address the issues of climate change. It will improve labor conditions. It will work towards enhancing the protection of human rights. So all these issues that have been high profile in the agreement, in a way, they will improve. But on the other hand, the administration is focusing on reindustrialization of the country, and it's also an emphasis in the whole bloc. So there are contradicting trends that do not allow us really to give a full answer. And then on top of it, there's of course the prioritization of the regional integration in South America itself. As Inna said, it's very important regional integration in the region, right? Sometimes we hear ideas such as a common currency and others, and surprisingly, the agreement has come to the forefront of Brazilian foreign policy exactly to save Mercosur as a bloc in face of the Uruguay negotiation with China, right? So it's very complex. There's a lot of contradicting trends. If I had to say yes or no on the question of this event today, I would say probably not, unless we really see an external shock or a creation of a new momentum that will allow us to really move quickly. But otherwise, I think that the agreement will be dragging for a few more years. Thanks.
Thank you, Gustavo. Bertram, it's a double-edged sword to speak last, but I will give the final word to you to sort of do your best to encapsulate what you've heard today and give us your final thoughts.
Thank you. You see me worried. You see me worried, and the specter in the room is CETA, which was concluded in 2014 and is not yet been ratified. No agreement. Having no agreement does mean we don't have influence, and no tree in the rainforest will be saved by not having an agreement. The agreement will give us the influence to work on that. Let's not wait for China to step in. As we see in the case of Uruguay, we should not expect from Chinese free trade agreements that the rainforest will be protected. There are other interests here. So please be fast, step in. We had a vast majority of the European industry suffering severe broken supply chain issues over the last year. And here we have a big chance to diversify our supply chain risk. So we should grab that chance very fast. If it's necessary to split the agreement, let's split it. Let's give our industry and the Mercosur industry that chance. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bertrand, and thank you indeed to all our panelists. It's been an interesting conversation, I think a timely one, and indeed, judging by the interaction of the audience, something that has a lot of people spending a lot of time thinking about this. So thank you very much for giving us your time and your thoughts today. Remember, you can keep sharing your thoughts using the hashtag #EADebates, and do stay with Euractiv for more discussions on this and the main stories driving the news in Europe in the coming weeks and months.